Here we are in Reaper. I'm going to do a tone match for the Nux Mighty plug. I had a suggestion to do Boston, so I'm going to drop an isolated track I downloaded, and we're going to edit that down. It looks like a stereo track, so I'm going to process this. So now we've got both left and right signals here, and now I just want to check to make sure that these aren't just doubles. The acoustic guitar is canceling out, so that's just up the center. I'm going to make this its own track. The less information, the better. Now I'm just going to snip out the parts that I want. I'm looking for parts where it's just electric guitar by itself. Found some parts of the song, some parts of the isolated track that I want to use, and I'm going to loop them. We've got Fab Filter, Pro Q3 on each track, and I'm going to have our source track, which is going to be the one we're playing guitar through, to be looking at the other one. So track 1 is looking at track 2's EQ curve. And I'm going to plug up my Mighty plug and get moving. It's going to sound pretty bad because there's no cab. So I've got my source set to detect the ISO Pro Q. And now I'm going to EQ match. And I'm going to let it rip. This is going to sound pretty bad. I don't know how to play Boston, so sorry. Okay, I played till I didn't want to play anymore. And I've hit match, and this is what it spits out. Let's put a little reverb on it so it sounds a little more authentic. When you've got multiple guitars stacked on top of each other, it makes it a little more difficult to get a singular sound that sounds like those stacked sounds, but you get a pretty good approximation. I've got a tone match I guess I'm happy with. I'm going to unplug everything. First thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to save the preset with the blank impulse response. I've got a category called TM blank, tone match blank. I'm going to call this Boston blank, save. So I know how the amp was set up. Now I'm going to go back into Reaper, hit finish. Here's our finished impulse response. And now what I want to do is I want to create an impulse response. So I'm going to use a plugin that's native to Reaper called Reverb. And we're going to add file, but we're not really going to add a file. We're going to hit cancel. And what you want to do is you want to generate a test tone. It doesn't matter what the length is. It does matter what the sample rate is. For your Nux Mighty plug, you want 44100.0 hertz for your sample rate. That's what it is. That's what we're going to leave it as. And for your wave bit depth, you want 32, which is what it says right here. So we're going to leave it. Now I've already created a sweep, and it's right here. So what I'm going to do is I point to that file, and I'm just going to drag it right in and hit cancel. So now what this does for you is generates a sine sweep, a very loud sine sweep. So first thing I do is I take this and I turn it way the heck down. This will blast your ears out. I warn you. In fact, I'm going to turn my volume way down. Ooh, it's loud. Not clipping anything though. Okay, so let's zoom in here. In Reaper, when you import audio, looks like it doesn't have much of an auto fade there. So it's making a sweep of this EQ that we've made. We're going to render just this section, file, render. We're going to do time selection. I'm going to choose my directory. Sample rate 44.1. Channels mono. We want this to be mono. 32-bit floating point. Wave. Good. I'm going to render. So now what we have is that sine sweep EQ'd by the Boston EQ. And now we want to come down here to deconvolve. And it wants us to point to this sweep of the impulse response we've created. So I'm going to find that real quick. I didn't call it anything, but I know which one it was. It was this untitled one. So I'm going to open that. Now it wants me to find the sweep that I made. So I'm going to go find that sweep. I know exactly where that is. It's a good idea to know where your stuff is. Now it wants you to save this rendered, this deconvolved impulse response. Wave bit depth 32, that's what we want. I'm going to call this Boston Raw. And I'm going to save this to my directory. Boston Raw, save. So now I've got my raw version of this impulse response. And I'm going to import that. Boston Raw. I'm going to import this into Reaper on its own track. Okay, I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to disable the crossfades by just getting rid of them. Okay, so now we're left with a tiny little blip of a sound. That is our impulse response. But right now it's really quiet, so we're going to normalize it, make it as loud as it can be without peaking. But that click, that's it. That's your impulse response. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to render again Boston IR. And I'm going to render. Now what I'm going to do to check and make sure that it's rendered correctly, load the impulse response. Okay, so now I've loaded the IR onto our track. We've got our same preset we had from before. All right, sounds pretty good. Let's turn off the IR. Turn on Fab Filter. Compared them, they sound good. We're on the GitHub IR patcher. And here it is. So the first thing you want to do is pick your firmware. And I've got 2.1 right here. And then you can start choosing your impulse responses. And now I've already got some loaded into here, so I'm just going to add those in the order they're in my Mighty plug, so I don't have to go and rename them in a different order, and all my presets will line up. Then blank. I've got my Van Halen Tonematch, and I've got my Boston Tonematch. Okay, got my firmware, got my impulse responses, process and download. Okay, I'm going to move this over to my working folder on my desktop. Then you're ready to install. So what you do at this point is you turn off, you plug in, hold the big button, push the power button, and get red flashing lights. Then you go to your updater, select File, find the one that you just downloaded, and go for it. You'll start flashing yellow at this point, and you'll update. So we'll wait. All right, we're so close. And when you're finished updating, you should be flashing green. So you can go ahead and close, unplug, turn off, turn on. Okay, now I'm going to open up our presets. I'm going to TM blank, open up my Boston blank. Go back to the editor, go to IR, go to this new impulse response and turn the volume down because it's going to be loud. Because remember, the blank impulse response I made makes things pretty quiet. So you've got to boost the level to hear it, make your tone match preset, turn the volumes down. So from here you can tweak things to your liking. You can up the gain. You know, your guitar is going to be a lot different than mine. So if you're using someone else's responses made this way, you're going to get the response of their guitar going into the amp model, going into the tone matched impulse response. So it could sound a little different with somebody else's guitars, somebody else's fingers. So you can compensate with the bass, middle, treble, presence controls, gain knob. That's my process in a nutshell. Does it sound completely close? I would probably go back and make some tweaks, but it's pretty workable for a demo video. So I hope you found this useful, and I hope you like it, and I hope you could try it on your own.